Hey, it's Dr. T, and our question this episode is why are cities, towns, and local communities struggling? So, just for a little historical context, it was during the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s that cities in the United States really exploded in growth. People came there looking for opportunities to work in the factories that were located in the cities. In the 1900s, as we talked about in a previous episode, there was a huge migration from the south of the United States to these industrial cities in the north. People were looking for jobs that paid better, and in particular, they were union jobs. That was the reason that they paid better. All of this migration meant that there were some very serious housing shortages in our urban centers all across the United States in the years leading up to World War II. So once we get through World War II, the federal government knows they have to address the housing situation. And the decision was made to move housing outside of cities. People were looking to get out of cities that were very polluted in those days, crowded, noisy. And so a lot of building that went on was right outside of those urban areas, what we now think of as the suburbs. And one of the key things the federal government did to facilitate this was it in the GI Bill made it possible for white men, not black men, to purchase homes very inexpensively. In most cases, a day's wages down was all that they needed. And so whites in particular fled the urban areas and moved out into the suburbs. So lots of building going on outside the cities. The other thing that continued to fuel this suburbanization process, as we call it, is that Eisenhower, who was president in the 1950s, decided to invest in what we now call the interstate highway system. And this was done ostensibly for military purposes. If we had to, fight a Soviet attack, we could move equipment and people easily with these good roads. But what it really did, since we never actually used it for that, was it made it a lot easier for people to move out of cities, away from those factories, away from jobs, and have sort of that suburban, quieter lifestyle, maybe a little bit more land in terms of a yard, and then use that highway system to very quickly and easily get back into the cities. Now, these choices that were made, these policy decisions that were made at the federal level had huge consequences for our cities. First of all, African Americans were not able to get financing to move out and buy these homes, as we said, because the GI Bill did not make these benefits available to black men. But they also were not able to get money to fix up the homes that they were in the cities. And so this led to kind of this downward spiral of a large percentage of the African American population who had been in the cities being trapped in the cities, and more importantly, being trapped in housing that was not well taken care of. They were not able to get the resources to do that. And the highways, because we invested in the highways, we did not invest in public transportation. So what happens is eventually the businesses follow people out of the cities. And so people who are in the cities can't get to the jobs that are outside of the cities because they don't have a good way to get there. There's not good transportation between the suburbs and the cities. So unemployment rises in our cities and poverty rises in our cities because of this. So when you have property values worth less, you have what we call a shrinking tax base. There are fewer people you can go to, fewer businesses that you can go to, and those that are there are worth less, so you've got a lot less money to work with. This means that public services take a steep decline in this time frame after World War II. Welfare services, hospital services, case management services, all of those are difficult to fund. Police and fire protection takes a hit. In our cities, we started to see giant potholes, decaying bridges, all that, we call it the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure of the building starts to decline. And then, of course, as we talked about in a previous episode, public schools start to decline because they don't have the money coming from the tax base to go into their coffers. The other big thing we've seen in cities is what I think of as the great giveaway. And this really began in the 90s and has accelerated since then, is that as these cities lose people, as they lose businesses, as that tax base shrinks, they become desperate to attract money to their communities. And so what they do is they start competing with other cities. Sometimes this happens on the state level, for anybody who says they will come in and will create jobs by opening a business of some sort. And so these various communities race to give away money to people who are going to be bringing these jobs, hopefully. So they'll give them tax breaks for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. You don't have to pay taxes for 30 years if you will come and build your factory here. As if that weren't enough, they spend millions and in some cases billions of dollars, again, to try to get people to come. Say, okay, we'll put in all the electricity that you need. We'll pay for all the water and sewer that you need to come out to your plant. We will build the roads. Anything you need, we will spend it. Our tax dollars will go to pay for that so that you, a private company, will come and bring your jobs here. That's how desperate we are to get jobs in our area. What's even more troublesome from the city standpoint is that many of these things are not even steady, reliable jobs. They're seasonal. And one of the main examples is this, our sports arenas. Major cities across the country have decided that in order to be taken seriously, in order to be a big, important city, you need professional sports teams. And so they will do all the things I talked about in terms of tax giveaways and building infrastructure for them to get sports teams to relocate to their cities. But nobody plays all year round. Some of these sports, football, for example, is once a week. So you are not creating full-time jobs that pay a livable wage. You're creating seasonal jobs. Now, the hope is that you'll spur economic activity around these arenas, of course, that there'll be restaurants and other forms of entertainment. But again, if you're counting on the sporting events to drive foot traffic to the restaurants, for example, football games are once a week. Baseball games a couple of times a week, maybe. So it's not dollar for dollar. It's really not a great investment for the community, but cities feel compelled to compete in that way. We've continued to see a lot of people move out of cities because, again, this sort of downward spiral of shrinking tax base makes it less enjoyable to live there, right? If you don't have the services that you would hope you would have as a member of a city, as a citizen of a city, you may decide you don't want to live there anymore. Now, most cities do have pockets of affluence, places where people who are wealthier live, but that's not always enough to sustain the city as a whole. They don't pay enough in taxes to keep the cities floating, essentially. And so you've got this race to the bottom in these giveaways that has really bankrupted or nearly bankrupted many cities, many communities, on just the hope that they can get jobs to come.